So here it is, the first week of March, and I'm wearing a sweater. It is cold. Some polar vortex has come down from Canada and has given us quite a shock, and it's going to be even cooler over the weekend. In this strange time, things just keep getting more strange. But you have to smile, and that's what I'm here to help you with today. A merry heart doeth good like a medicine, the Bible says. So here's hopefully some medicine for you today. In one of his videos, George mentioned some funny things that happened to him over the years with regards to weddings, and it made me think about how many weird, funny things have happened to me involving weddings, and I want to share a couple of them with you right now. One that I particularly remember was a big, massive wedding that was held at great expense, I have to imagine, at one of the more prominent First Baptist churches in South Carolina. And the wedding was to be held near Christmas, so the church was decorated, poinsettias and holly and ivy and all that all over the church. And there was this over to the side of the chancel, kind of down in front, was a table, and on it was a beautiful nativity scene. Now, I have to imagine that nativity scene had been more centrally located, but for the sake of that wedding, they, I guess, moved it over to the side. In hindsight, they should have just moved it completely out of the church. But nevertheless, while I was doing the ring ceremony part, the ring vows of the liturgy, I heard a terrible crash. In fact, everybody did, and the wedding came to a complete screeching halt, because as it turned out, one of the bridesmaids had passed out. And I try before every wedding that I do to tell people, don't lock your knees. Make sure you kind of stay loose, because if you lock your knees, you'll cut off your blood supply and you'll pass out. But apparently this person didn't pay attention, which is not anything new. I've got children. I know about people not paying attention to me, on top of being a pastor. But nevertheless, so she passed out, but not just passed out in the floor. She passed out on that beautiful nativity scene, and in the process, she destroyed the manger itself. She broke two of the three wise men. She crushed a camel and decapitated Saint Joseph. I always thought that one of these days I'm going to be able to use that in a sermon, but the only segue, the only thing I could think of that I could lead into would be the decapitation of John the Baptist by King Herod, but it just doesn't fit. But in case I ever do, just pretend you've never heard this story before and treat it next time as new information. Next story. This was a small country church. A lot of people in this particular church and in this community, as most small towns in South Carolina are. These people were all interrelated. Everybody was somehow related to one another, except, of course, the bride and groom. But everybody was somebody's cousin or aunt or uncle or something like that. So all these family members of both sides gathered in this church and really crammed in this little church for this wonderful occasion. And this couple wanted to use a unity candle in their service. Now, unity candles are not a part of our standard liturgy. In the history of additions to wedding ceremonies, they're pretty new. Last 30, 40, 50 years, I guess. so there's no real standard way, I guess, of doing it. But I did instruct the couple, because the space in that little church was limited. The chancel was really small, and where that candle was, and because of the bride's gown, I was really afraid that either she was going to set her gown on fire, or they were going to knock the thing over. And so I made sure to tell them to, stand as far apart as you can. They wanted to do it at the same time, and they were on the opposite sides of the candle. I said, okay, stand as far apart as you can to light that one candle from your two candles. But also be careful as you put your candle towards that one, because you don't want to drip the hot wax on her beautiful, dress. As it turns out, that was the least of my worries, because when we got to that point in the service, and the two of them went over to the unity candle, that unity candle was not 2 feet from me. That's how cramped the space was. I mean, I could, at one point, I was more worried about me catching fire with my robe than with the bride's gown. Nevertheless, when the two of them moved and navigated over there was really no place for them to socially distance themselves, so to use a new word, a new phrase. And so when they went in to light that candle, she tilted her candle too far, and instead of the hot wax falling on her, a ton of hot wax spilled on the groom's wrist and down his shirt sleeve, down his arm. And the funny part about that, not that being burnt with hot wax was funny, but I'm standing right there, and for reasons known but to the Lord, they insisted on me wearing a microphone, which you didn't need in that church because you could hear everything in there. It was just a small church, but I had a microphone on. And when the hot wax went down his arm, that groom said some words that I am convinced had never been spoken in that church before or since. All of their grandmothers were there, and I do have to imagine that years were probably taken off of their grandmothers' lives as a result of what was said that evening in that church. Last wedding story. So I had a young couple in my church, and the young man had joined the church from another denomination, and he had grown up in a particular church that had been blessed to have had its pastor for 30 years or something like that. They obviously weren't Methodist. Nevertheless, they wanted this fella to actually do the vows, participate in the service and do the vows. That was fine with me. It was sentimental and all of that, so I invited the guy to do it. I did not realize that he was as elderly as he turned out to be. I'm not talking about the young end of elderly here. I'm talking about way up there, like old as baseball elderly. Nevertheless, he gets there, and we began the service. Service is going fine, and I hand it off to him. He begins the liturgy of the wedding ceremony. Only he calls this couple by two names I was not familiar with. But then I thought, well, maybe these are their first names, legal names. I don't know. Maybe I've been calling them by their middle name or their nickname all this time. I had no idea. And so he continues to go through this ceremony. and he's calling them, by these two different names. He gets all the way to the end, and just at this point, I've sort of reconciled to the fact that this is what's going on. He's using their first names or whatever. But I was wrong. He got to the end of the service, and then he presented Mr. and Mrs. wrong first names and then wrong last names. I was stunned. I was not the only one. After the service was over, the bride and the groom are just heartsick, grief-stricken, and also a little bit afraid. And they said, "Are we married?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if you're married, but Bob and Jenny are married, whoever they are." But that little attempt at humor did not satisfy them, and they were really concerned. And I said, "Well, here's what I think. The wedding license has your name on it, your real name, both of your real names. And you said that you'd take him, and you said that you'd take her back, and you both said I do. And the Lord knows what your name is, and the Lord knows the intent of your heart, so I'd say you're married." Now, if you ask that old preacher, I don't think he knows you're married, because I don't even think he knows who you are. But for the sake of me and the state of South Carolina and Jesus, I think you're married. And I hope that is something that puts a smile on your face and is good medicine for you today.